Hi everyone. In this video, I want to introduce the last of your major writing projects, the research essay. In a separate video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the final portfolio that goes along with this. But then in this video, I wanted to really focus on the writing project itself that you're going to be doing in the first part of this unit before you turn your attention to the final portfolio. The name may seem generic in terms of research essay, but it is a very specific and focused assignment that's going to ask you to do a lot of research. Obviously, there's a huge research component, and really turn your attention to making an argument for an audience in your field. Right? So this paper is going to be based around writing to a group of people in your field of study, your major, and thinking about engaging in conversations and strategies for talking to that audience in particular. So what you're going to be doing is writing an argument relevant to that, to your major, your field of research, or your intended one. If you're going to switch, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be tied specifically to the one you are now. If you plan on switching majors, or if you're a double major, you can pick either one, something like that. So your goal in this paper is to convince and persuade your audience of your answer, of your proposal, your solution or your course of action on an issue. So to do this, the paper is going to be research-based. There's going to be a lot of evidence you're bringing in from outside sources to support your claims, to make a strong case to your reader about why they should listen to what you have to say. And then within the essay itself, you're not only going to need strong sources, but you're going to need to really dig into alternative hypotheses, opposing viewpoints. You have to make a case for your reader why, for an audience in your field, especially, why they should listen to what you have to say and why they should be convinced and persuaded by your arguments. So as you're going to work through this, your goal is twofold. First, you want to talk about why your issue is relevant to this audience, right? Which, on a surface level shouldn't be too hard, right? If you think about people in your field, why is this issue relevant to them? But once you do that, you also need to talk about what the impact or consequences of your argument may be. Right? So why do we care about this issue? Right? What's it going to have for people in the field? Part of this assignment too is also about writing for the audience in your field. So unlike the first two papers, which were in MLA, you're going to determine the academic style you're writing this last paper in based on the style used by your field. So it may be MLA or APA, Chicago or Turabian, or another style. And so you're going to be using that and kind of modeling the practices and conventions and expectations in your field. So for this paper, your argument should be both convincing the audience the importance and relevance of your specific issue and persuading them by proposing a feasible solution that addresses the issue. So what to do, what not to do. As with the last paper, the community-based argument, again, you're using a lot of outside research, even more for this paper. So it is still crucial that you are making the argument and you're using your sources to support your claims. And that is especially the case when writing for an audience in your field, right? You also need to think about what does your audience already know and not know, right? Since you're writing for a more specialist audience, there are going to be things that they would know that you wouldn't have to cite in the source that a general readership might not. So you need to think about that. The key thing is that research essay does not mean summary of your sources, but instead a thoroughly well thought out, researched, and organized argument for a specific academic audience. So knowing terms, ideas, things like that that are important and relevant to your field are good. If you have questions about that, if you're not sure whether something is maybe understood by those in your field, a good rule is if you see a lot of your sources kind of all referring to something without citing another source about the issue, you can assume that within the field it's probably general or common knowledge, right? You wouldn't have to cite it. However, if you do note sources are citing other sources, or if they have a source for their information, things like that, I would go and cite it. And again, if you're ever worried, I always say just err on the side of caution and cite it. I'm not usually going to penalize you for citing a source. However, I will penalize you for not citing one. It seems like you would need to cite one. So if beyond that, it is important, and it becomes a challenge always, the more research you do, to make sure that you have your argument throughout this paper. It's laid out, you're making your case for the reader, and they see what your argument is. And especially that's the case when it comes to the proposal, right? Now, when we talk about proposals and you learn about proposals a little bit more in this unit, a proposal doesn't always have to be fixing a problem. A proposal can also be, just arguing for any sort of course of action, right? So if you notice a really interesting or positive trend or something's working really well over here and you want to say, hey, we should all be adopting that practice, that's something you could be doing, right? That's a proposal. You could say, hey, we need to be like these other people. And indeed, a proposal needs to be feasible. It needs to be something your audience can actually do, and it needs to be something that they think is actually going to have some sort of impact, right? Because if you say, oh, we'll do this, and nobody thinks it's actually going to make a change, that's a problem. So in terms of the sources for this paper, since you're writing for a more academic audience, I'm asking for a larger component of academic and sources overall. So for this paper, you need to have at least 7 outside sources in your paper. 3 of those need to be academic journal articles or chapters, whatever, academic sources from your field. So again, the Maybe Library databases are going to be huge here. There are, Academic Search Complete is a good one, but especially when you're looking in your field, if you go to the Maybe Library website, you can search databases by subject area and usually by your area of study, so you can find more specific databases out there that might have good sources for you to look at for this paper. So again, if you pick a more recent topic, you've got to think that think about the peer-reviewed journals, article sources, and think that they may not be as recent, so you might have to go a little bit more broadly with those. But as always, if you have questions, if you have trouble finding sources, you're not sure where to look, let me know, and I'm glad to help out with that whole process and kind of facilitate it however I can. So as always, you need to cite all the sources in the body of the paper, but how you do that for this paper is going to vary based on the style you're using, right? So APA and MLA both use in-text citations. Depending on the style you use in Chicago, your citations might be more footnote-based, so it just kind of depends. But you need to have both those in-text citations and your references, your works cited page, your bibliography, whatever your style calls for at the end of the paper. In terms of selecting a topic, again, you want to make sure it's a topic and not a subject. You want to make sure it's focused and specific. It should be current and relevant to your field. It also has to be an issue that you can propose some sort of course of action for, right? Again, it doesn't have to be a problem you're fixing, but it does need to be something you can say, hey, now that I've already made this argument for you about it, here's what we can do, right? Here's that next step. Because that's one of the things I'm going to be looking for, is that there's a clear proposal in the body of your paper that says to your audience, here is what I'm arguing that we do about this. So since this is your last project, it's kind of the culmination of the course. It's more intensive. It's going to be a bit longer. So this paper is a minimum of 2,000 words, max of around 2,500. So that's 2,000 to 2,500 is the range you're working for. Again, the academic style is your choice, depending on, and it should be the one that works, for your field, right? That if you tend to be in social sciences, it may be more APA focused. If you tend to be in the humanities, it might be MLA, or it could be Chicago, right? So you want to think about that. But otherwise, they should all have the same basic format. You should still be kind of 12-inch, 12-point Times New Roman or Calibri, double-spaced, 1-inch margins on all sides. Follow all the formatting guidelines for your style. Make sure you have your in-text citations as well as your in-text citations. So what I'm looking for in this paper, what I'm grading for in particular, and again, there's the rubric on D2L, which I also recommend looking at, but I am looking that you have a clear, specific rhetorical purpose, right? That you're able to establish and support your argument early on in the paper, that you explore multiple facets of the issue. So there's, if you look at the grading criteria on the assignment sheet, there's a lot of different facets listed there: ideological, social, cultural, political, economic, historical. I'm not asking that you look at your issue through all of these, but maybe through 1 or 2 of them, right? Depending on what you're talking about. What is the economic impact of funding small businesses in Kansas, right? What are the political stakes for allowing more and more donations from corporations, things like that, right? So you're thinking about, why does this matter to an audience, and in what specific ways does it matter to them? So you should be looking at your issue through those facets, and writing to construct an informed, critical position about the topic. Right? So we should be clear what your view is on this issue and what your argument is and what you're trying to make the case for. And that's one of the big things that really needs to come through in this paper. You should conduct inquiry-based research and writing, which is driven by the desire to study an issue relevant to your major field of study, right? So you're getting into the specifics of your area, right? So this is, the research should be reflecting that, your writing should be reflecting that. And then, like I said, I'm also looking that this culminates in a proposal. And a note here that the proposal shouldn't be kind of a throwaway sentence or two in the conclusion of your paper. Say, oh, we should do this. It should be, you know, usually 1 to 2 strong paragraphs before your conclusion that says, here is the course of action I am arguing that we take, and here's why I think it's going to work. Here's what I think the effects will be, things like that. It should definitely be focused on at least the short term, right? That's something your reader should know. What can we do about this, and what effect is that going to have in the next, you know, couple months, years, whatever the kind of time frame you're looking at. You can also talk about the long-term solution or impact, or, you know, your kind of hopes, but you don't always have to go that far, right? I am not asking that you solve, you know, this is not a solve all of world hunger in a single paper problem, right? But what is one specific course of action we can take moving forward to start chipping away and addressing the issue? So a note, it says there on the assignment sheet, I want to point out too, so the research essay is, you will be submitting it to me and you'll get feedback, and then you'll be kind of turning it in again with the final portfolio. And so the research essay and the final portfolio together, about 20% of, or they're 30% of your overall course grade together. 20% of that final portfolio grade is towards the research essay, right? So you'll get some feedback from me, and you have the opportunity, if you want to revise it, you can. Otherwise, that grade will kind of stand as is after you've submitted it. And then the other 10% of that final portfolio, which we'll talk about in the video that introduces the final portfolio specifically and talks about that, is the revision part of the assignment and the reflective cover letter. So note that this grading breakdown is only for the research essay portion, not for the entire final portfolio. And you'll notice too that there's this is a longer unit. This is 3 weeks instead of 2. There's some more process work built in because it's a longer, more involved paper. So one thing you'll notice, again, you're going to submit a topic paragraph very early in the unit, so you can make sure both can make sure you're on the right track with your topic. And then you're going to have an annotated bibliography due. And I want you to look at the assignment sheet for that too, because that's pretty important. Now, what an annotated bibliography is, if you've never done one before, is not just a list of your sources, but it's a list of your sources and a write-up of each of them. And so what I'm looking for in the annotated bibliography is that you have your 7 sources that you're going to be using for the paper. And again, if you change some of them later, that's fine. That's part of the process. But you have citations for your 7 sources, and then you have annotations for each of them. And what an annotation is, it's usually, you know, 5 to 9 sentences, one strong paragraph that does 3 things. It should very briefly establish the credibility of your source. And then in a couple of sentences, it should kind of summarize the main argument or the main point, and any kind of sort of key outcomes that you want to highlight. And then it should analyze it. So in particular, it should explain what is interesting about this source, what does it bring to your project, and, you know, maybe how does it relate to your other sources, right? So there are more resources on D2L, and I definitely recommend looking at them, the assignment sheet in particular, the template, that kind of stuff, and let me know if you have questions. But that is going to be the second step of your project, is doing the annotated bibliography. So that's 15% of your grade. And you'll notice there's a little more process work on the grade here. So 5% for the topic paragraph, 15% for the annotated bibliography. This time around, you're going to have 2 drafts and 2 peer reviews that we're going to do. So the first draft, which is allowed to be a partial draft, so it should be at least 1,500 words. It doesn't have to be the whole paper, but it should be the kind of the bulk of your argument. So in most cases, people don't have their proposal written yet, but most of, if not the entire argument itself, is written for that first draft and that first peer review. So that's going to be 10% of the grade for the paper. And then you will have some time to get the feedback from your first peer review and work on putting together a full revised draft. So that one should be, you know, 2,000 words at least. All the I mean, both should have all the citations for everything you have in your paper so far, all that kind of stuff. So that will be The revised draft was another 10%. So there's 40% of this paper grade is actually process work, right? And that should kind of tell you how much is weighted towards the work you're doing up front, the research, the writing on this paper. In terms of the final draft, 5% each on organization, academic formatting and citations, and grammar mechanics, but 45% on content, obviously. Right? Again, I'm looking for the argument, the research, how you're using your sources, how it's all being presented. That's what I'm really looking at in grading. So, so pay attention, especially to the process. It's a little bit different here. I will have announcements on D2L, all the information there as well. You won't be caught off guard. And again, I'm always glad to, if you have questions about the topic, about the assignment, if you want to, go over a draft, I'm glad to do that and set up a time to do so. So please let me know, especially for this last paper, right? It's a little bit more intense. But otherwise, I look forward to seeing what direction you take in this last paper. I look forward, especially to kind of getting to the final drafts of the research essays, because they're always really interesting. And that helps me get more of a sense on what you're working on and what you might be going into down the road in your major and your field of study. So as always, if you have questions, you want to set up an appointment, let me know. Otherwise, good luck heading into this last major unit, and I will be here to help out however I can. Thanks.